attend and organise events that surround family violence to help ensure that women are heard and young women have voices. I wanted to represent myself as a Muslim woman and represent my community, so I thought why not start at a young age, so when I grow up perhaps I can be in Parliament one day. I feel like I should take advantage of these opportunities and make sure that I advocate on behalf of women, especially in my community that are subjected to family violence.
My name's Leslie. I have been with Moreland Family Daycare as an educator for over 36 years, I think. Family Daycare is a wonderful organisation. We look after children in our own home, they blend in with the family, and it's fantastic.
I love Family Daycare.
I can choose my own hours, very flexible. I've made wonderful friendships with lots of the families. I'm now looking after children of the children I used to care for. The children just growing and developing is a wonderful, wonderful experience for me every day. I'd recommend Family Daycare to anybody and everybody. Oh, where's my Scouty snuggle? Where's my Scouty snuggle? Can I have a Scouty snuggle? How's your tea party going?
My name's Hilary. I've been with Moreland Family Daycare for 8 months now and I absolutely love it. The main reason I started with Family Daycare was to be with my little one. Family Daycare is a small environment, so mostly I only have 4 children and it's in a home. Moreland have been really supportive with the whole thing and they helped me find children when I first started. There's so many benefits of working Family Daycare and becoming an educator. Working in your own home, flexible hours, also just watching the other children grow.
Hello and welcome to this NDIS information session which is being streamed live online via Moreland City Council's website and Facebook page. I'm Tracy Hutchison. I'm not the Mayor, but we are located in the Council chambers for this broadcast tonight. And I'll be facilitating this session. We'll introduce the NDIS this evening and explain how it works, describe the pathway into the NDIS and the rollout in the Hume and Moreland areas, and provide an opportunity for those here with us and watching online to ask questions and have them answered by experienced staff and providers. 2 people who are already recipients of the NDIS will also share their own experiences. So we've got a great lineup of experts and panel to discuss the issues this evening. Peter Person is from the NDIA, the agency implementing the scheme. Gemma Vaughan from the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, Moreland's NDIS local area coordinator. Samantha Sharp is the Manager of Aged and Disability Services at Moreland City Council. Meg Orman is with us. She's an NDIA staff member and current recipient of the NDIS. And Nancy Sathka, who's the parent of 2 children, both current recipients of the NDIS. So plenty of expertise and opportunity for you to also ask questions of us via our stream. We have Auslan interpreters here for the full duration of this live stream and they'll appear on screen. The session is also being recorded and will sit on Moreland City Council's website and Facebook page as a source of information for those who are unable to attend this session. So a terrific and informative session ahead and thanks so much for being part of it. So let's jump in and first up we'll hear from Peter Person from the NDIA who has lots of details to fill us in with. Peter, welcome and thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Tracy. I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also wanted to thank the Moreland Council for giving us this opportunity to perhaps reach a larger audience than we usually do. This is just part of the NDIS, I guess, trying to provide some initial information to people with disabilities, their families, their carers, interested local people. I guess one of the messages that we want to give tonight is in part, this is just the start of the journey for people with disability in coming into the NDIS. It is a huge scheme. There's a lot of change to get our heads around, but I guess we just want to reassure people that You don't have to come away from listening to this, this broadcast tonight and think that you have to understand every aspect of it. There's lots of information, there's lots of staff that are available to help you through this journey. And we're very excited about coming into Hume and Moreland. We're going to go live on the 1st of March 2018, so that's 3 or 4 months away. So there's time for people to start to get their heads around what it actually means, and hopefully we can start that journey for you tonight. The scheme is a huge thing. There's some 460,000 people coming into the NDIS over the next year and a half, so it'll be fully rolled out by the middle of 2019. So that's a huge undertaking by any measure. The great thing about that, it's not just a number, it means that there's some 180,000 people with disability who previously might not have been receiving a service coming into the scheme. So that's a wonderful thing. It really is a wonderful thing. I guess the other aspect to it is that it's a national scheme, and it means that what people receive in downtown Coburg, they can receive in Tennant Creek, and they can receive in Broome, and they can receive in Brisbane. That sort of equity across the country is really one of the features of the NDIS. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the other key features as we go through tonight. I just wanted to maybe some housekeeping. The NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, is the scheme that's being delivered across Australia. I work for the NDIA, the National Disability Insurance Agency, that is charged with implementing the scheme across the country. In Hume Moreland, we're working with the BSL, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, who are who are our key partners in delivering the scheme. So when you hear, when you come across the NDIA or the Brotherhood of St Lawrence in Hume and Moreland, you're talking to the same organisation. We speak as one. I guess we're, as I've indicated, the scheme is in transition. So people are moving from their, I guess, standard usual disability service, in this case mainly delivered in Victoria through the Department of Health and Human Services. So we're working very closely with the Department of Health and Human Services in trying to streamline that transition. So there's a whole lot of work that's going on behind the scenes about ensuring that we reach the people that are being currently supported by the Department of Health and Human Services. I guess suffice to say that sometimes in such a huge undertaking, things might go slightly awry. I guess we're very keen to rectify any issues that come up, and we'll provide a range of information about contact numbers that people can use to get in touch with us to sort those issues out. So what is the NDIS? I guess, as I've indicated, it is a huge undertaking, and I reckon the nub of it really is that when the NDIS was introduced, the idea is that we want to allow people with a disability to live an ordinary life, to live the sort of life that a person such as myself who doesn't have a disability just takes for granted. And that's kind of the genesis of it. That's the nub of it, if you like. The scheme is open to people between the ages of 0 and 65. Within that age range, there are 2 different pathways, and my colleague Gemma will talk a little bit more about that later on. But the 2 groups, generally speaking, are between the ages of 0 and 6 years. That's the early childhood, early intervention part. And it's great that there's such a huge emphasis on reaching out to young children to try and, I guess, give the support to them and their families as early as possible. The larger group, of course, is that group between 7 years and 65 years. I mentioned before that there's some 460,000 people coming into the scheme. In Hume Moreland, it's 8,000. So 8,000 people will be coming into the scheme in Hume and Moreland from March 1st next year.
That's all right.
Sorry about that.
You're very compelling.
Oh, I even got myself interested. So I guess just to run through some of the significant changes of the scheme. As I say, it really is sometimes hard to get your head around what it actually means. And I guess hopefully I can explain a little bit about this in layperson's terms. I guess there are three things that I would focus in on. One is that the NDIS has really flipped on its head the way that services are funded and are going to be delivered to people with disability. Previously, services had been funded by government providing block funding, if you like, large amounts of money to service providers, and they providing a service which people accessed. The NDIS delivers the money to people with disability, their families and their carers. They make the decisions about what service provider they will use, or what range of service providers they will use. Now that's a big thing to get your head around, and I know that at some levels creates anxiety, but as I mentioned before, there are a range of supports that are around people to assist them to ensure that change in the way that we're working can be understood by people and made real for people. So that essentially gives people control over their life. I guess that's the essence of it. So it's called choice and control. The other part is that the level of funding isn't capped. So whatever the level of funding that is required by a person, that's the funding that's supplied. Previously, under other schemes, there's a level of funding, and those those services are funded to a certain extent. Under the NDIS, it's really based on the needs and supports of the person, and then the funding is the commensurate funding is supplied to meet those particular needs. So who can access the NDIS? Clearly a very important question. There are 4 real criteria that need to be met in terms of accessing the NDIS. I guess the most significant of which is permanent disability. That means that a person has a significant and permanent disability. So I myself have a slight hearing loss in one ear, which means sometimes I can't hear so well. I wouldn't meet the criteria for the NDIS because the functional impact, the day-to-day impact on my life, because of my hearing loss, is not such that it meets that significant criteria or threshold, if you like. So I guess that's the most important thing, that the disability has to be significant and have a functional impact on the person with disability. I've mentioned the age, so between the ages of 0 and 65. If a person, I should mention, if a person reaches the age of 65, then they can, and are a participant of the NDIS, they can choose to remain in the NDIS, or they can exit the scheme and enter the aged care system. So there is that continuity of service. Residency. This is about Australian citizenship or being an Australian resident. There are other visa categories which are a little bit complicated to mention, but there is a whole range of information about that. And fourthly, the NDIS area. So in Hume Moreland, clearly people need to be a resident of Hume or Moreland. This criteria will no longer be relevant once the NDIS rolls out across the country. So those are the 4 criteria around which people have to meet access criteria to get into the NDIS. One of the things that is also important about the NDIS is that if a person doesn't meet those access requirements, there will still be a range of support that is offered to people to, I guess, hook them up with existing mainstream or community-based services. So the NDIS and the BSL in this case don't shut the door, say, you don't meet the access criteria, bad luck. No. It's about ensuring that we try and support those people to put them in touch with the kinds of services that might be able to assist them with their particular needs. So this is just trying to give you a snapshot of the NDIS pathway. So there are, I guess, 4 points. I'm not sure whether you can actually see this on the screen, but so we've touched a little bit on what the NDIS is and how people can access it. So the other 3 parts, I guess, to the cycle, if you like, when you enter the NDIS is the first plan, starting the plan and reviewing the plan. And I guess this is something also that I hope you would take away from tonight's information session. The first plan is the first plan. There will be many plans in a person's journey with the NDIS. And I know that there's a level of anxiety for people around feeling that when they get access to the NDIS and get their first plan, they have to try and get every single thing into their first plan. Because the NDIS is this lifelong association with a person, there will be many opportunities to revisit what's required to support a person, and people's needs change throughout their life. So after the first plan, there will be a review after 12 months, and those supports can be revisited. There will be then assistance when the plan is agreed to actually start the plan, to implement the plan. So people are not left necessarily to their own devices. They can do so if they choose to, but there are a range of supports that will help people implement their plan. And then, as I mentioned, after a period of time, 12 months in the case of the first plan, the plan will be reviewed. And so I guess that's the time. Those reviews will happen periodically throughout the person's association with the NDIS to revisit what the support needs are. So this is just a little bit of information about what's included in the plan. And I guess we realise that we would hope that people spend a lot of time thinking about what their goals and aspirations are. What is it that they want to achieve through the plan? And we have got in the next couple of slides, an example of a mock plan which will give people some more information, if you like, about what those goals and aspirations might look like. It's also important to think about the community and what the other sorts of supports that a person with disability gets. So by informal supports, we mean the person's family, their neighbours, their friends, the sorts of things that, all people have in their life or can have in their life. There are also mainstream services. So one of the emphases of the NDIS is working with people to identify what the mainstream services are that support them. And I guess the NDIS is working with mainstream services to, I guess, ask them to come to the party in terms of making reasonable adjustments so that mainstream services are accessible to people with disability. And the third part of the scheme is the NDIS funded support. So depending on what the identified needs are, the NDIS will fund supports that meet the disability-specific needs of the person with disability. The terminology that's used, and people will see this time and time again, are what are called reasonable and necessary supports. There are a range of criteria that sit underneath that. But again, there's a lot of information, and you don't feel as though you have to get your head around what reasonable and necessary means tonight. But that's the kind of terminology that you will hear from time to time. So this is a copy of a mock plan. It just gives you some idea of, this is kind of the detail, the information, the person's name. This gives you some information about part one of the plan, which talks a little bit, is a summary of who the person is and the important sort of aspects of their life, what they get up to on a daily basis. So it's trying to build up a picture of who that person is and who the important parts, who the important players are in their life. As I mentioned before, there really is an emphasis in the NDIS planning about the goals. So here's some examples of what those goals might look like. So visiting galleries, continue to visit this person's elderly mother. It really depends on the individual person and obviously at what particular age they are at. So clearly that will drive what the person's goals are. And clearly with younger people, family will play a critical role in working with the person with disability about what those goals might be. So as I mentioned before, this part looks at the supports, so the informal supports, that is the family, neighbours, those sorts of things, services and community groups, and then it looks at the mainstream and community supports, community being like the footy club or the cricket club. And then there's the reasonable and necessary supports, that is the funded supports that the NDIS will give money for. So again, to emphasise, the funding goes for to fund disability-specific support. So those sort of things, in a person's daily life. So it might be anything from assisting a person to bathe. It might be then assisting a person to go out. It can assist with home modification. So there's a whole plethora of supports that the NDIS will fund. Too numerous to mention. An important part of the development of the plan is what's called the planning conversation. I guess another little bit of cute speak, if you like. But it really is trying to say that the NDIS is trying really to work with the person with disability and the key people in their life who are important to be around the table to speak to in very real terms what's important for that person. So that planning conversation about, the person's in the NDIS, they've been accepted into the NDIS, and they're starting to make a plan about what is it that that NDIS plan might look like. The planning conversation, it's really a critical part of that whole process. And people can bring absolutely anybody they want to that conversation. They might last anywhere up to 2 or 3 hours. Importantly, we need to talk about what the NDIS will fund. And I guess at a top line, as I've indicated, it really is that the NDIS will fund disability-specific supports. As I mentioned before, this terminology, reasonable and necessary. These are the 6 criteria that the NDIS uses to make that assessment of what reasonable and necessary is. So the NDIA will make a decision based on each of those criteria, and they're relatively straightforward. So representing value for money. So an example being, if a person needs a particular wheelchair and there's a wheelchair that costs $60,000 and there's a wheelchair that costs $40,000 and basically they meet that person's needs, they both meet that person's need, then the NDIA will fund the $40,000 wheelchair. But again, I would emphasise that people don't necessarily have to get their head around that tonight. There's plenty of time to understand, I guess, the intricacies of the NDIA. It's probably just as important to understand what the NDIS doesn't fund. And as I mentioned before, there's that interface between the NDIS and mainstream services. So we won't fund health conditions or supports that relate to health conditions, I should say. And likewise, the scheme won't fund people's daily living costs. This is just a quick slide to give you a sense of the pace of the rollout. In Victoria, there's some 100,000 people coming into the scheme over the next 3 years. We've got a year and a half to go. So it is an enormous undertaking to get the NDIS up and running by the middle of 2019. So I'm going to hand over to Gemma now. She's going to provide, I guess, some of the detail around how planning works, and I guess the specific role of the BSL in terms of working with adults and working with young kids.
Thanks very much.
And your clicker.
Great, I'll pass the clicker. Thank you. So this is Gemma Vaughan from the Brotherhood of St Lawrence.
Thank you. So, as mentioned, my name is Gemma. I'm from the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. I'm a local area coordinator for the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, and I've been working in the local area coordination space with BSL, Brotherhood of St Lawrence, since June 2016. And at the moment, I'm in the Hugh Moreland establishment team with 2 other members. So the 2 other members, like myself, have been involved in local area coordination since June 2016. So we have as much experience as possible in the scheme, because it hasn't been around for a long time in providing this specific service. So just a bit about the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. Most people have heard of the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, especially in Hugh Moreland, because we do have a pre-existing kind of base there. The Brotherhood of St Lawrence was founded in 1930 during the Great Depression, and the main aim for the Brotherhood of St Lawrence is to create an Australia free of poverty. So the main way in doing that is by addressing inequality. So Peter before talked about how in the past, when services did exist for people with a disability, what you might get in Tennant Creek wouldn't be the same as what you would get in the city of Moreland. So it's about addressing those gaps and making sure that people with a disability have equal opportunity to anything in life, to live an ordinary life. So in that sense, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence has very similar values to the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And I guess it's really important to emphasise, as Peter has emphasised before, that the Brotherhood of St Lawrence and the NDIA work very closely together. So when you have a plan from the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, it's similar to having a plan from the NDIA. So the Brotherhood of St Lawrence is the community partner for the NDIS in the city of Hugh Moreland, and we're pretty excited, the same as the NDIA, to be providing services because we've seen the positive impacts that it has had in NEMA, so the North East Metropolitan area where we've worked before, and this time we've got 5 months to get ready to prepare people about what the NDIS is going to look like for them. So you're going to see a lot of acronyms. So the first one is LAC, so Local Area Coordinator, and then there's ECEI, so that's the Early Childhood, Early Intervention part of the scheme. So at the moment, just generally speaking, if that person in the middle of the slide isn't Local Area Coordinator or an Early Childhood, Early Intervention Coordinator, we've got kind of 5 spheres in which we work with. So the first one is the mainstream systems. So Peter touched on this before, that we have a responsibility to direct people to access mainstream systems and for mainstream systems to be equitable for people who have a disability. So I'm going to steal an example Peter's used before. He didn't use it tonight, but historically in the past, if someone had an intellectual disability and they had access to funding such as an individual support package and they were sent to hospital, the hospital would generally ask, and not all hospitals, but it would be a general request that the person use their individual support package funding to have a support worker in the hospital for them, because the hospital staff weren't trained or had the ability to support people with intellectual disabilities. So we're looking at shifting that focus and making sure that mainstream systems make reasonable adjustments so that they can be more inclusive of people with a disability. And on the flip side, we support people who have access to the scheme and are a participant to access mainstream systems. So, for example, through Medicare, you can get 5 allied health sessions. So we'd let people know that those particular services are available to them. The second way we support people is by assisting them to get access to the scheme and doing the planning. So that might be some pre-planning, having a planning conversation, implementing the plan, and I'll go into that a bit further later. And then we also provide information, linkages and capacity building supports. So with information, it could be just general information to carers about where they can get support around their caring role. Linkages is again linking into community and mainstream services and even funded services, if that's in their plan, and then capacity building. So when someone has a plan, they may have capacity building funding in it, and that's the second part of the plan, and it could be therapy, developing a daily living plan so that person can be more independent in their home. So we're the community partners, so the Brotherhood of St Lawrence has a pre-established presence in the Hume and Moreland area, but we will have a local area coordination and an early childhood, early intervention presence, and we're working with the councils and the neighbourhood houses and people who are already present in the community to find out what exactly it is that they're doing and how we can support each other to be more inclusive.
Gemma, I'm just going to interrupt a little. We are taking this as a live stream, obviously, and taking some questions that are coming in as part of this broadcast is rolling. So people wanting to sort of respond, and a couple of questions already coming in. So you talked about the planning conversation, and Leanne was asking whether or not the planning conversation can be at a person's home. So probably just quick answers to some of these, but either Gemma Vaughan from the Brotherhood or Peter Person from the NDIA, either of you can respond to those.
Yeah, so the person whose plan it is the centre of the planning conversation. So wherever they're most comfortable to have their planning conversation is where we will meet with them. We've got safety measures in place where we may need to do a risk assessment. And that's just general work practice, but we definitely meet in people's homes if that's where they're going to be most comfortable to have their planning conversation.
And we have another question that's come in as well from Jim, who says, as a disabled Moorlander, can I start to apply for the NDIA now?
Yes.
Yes, please do.
Go for it, Jim.
Fantastic. So we are sort of taking questions through our live stream, which is through the Facebook live stream, and also some questions from the floor if you have some as well. Might just go back to you, Gemma.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Okay, well, thanks for the questions. And I guess the last sphere we work in, but it's also one of the most important spheres we work in, is working with family, friends and already pre-established community connections. So, like anyone, whether you have a disability or not, the most central people in your life are going to be your friends and family. So if that's something that, or they're people that you want to be involved in your planning conversation and you want to work with, that's something that we definitely take into consideration.
Right.
Beautiful. So the next couple of slides that I'm going to talk about are going to be really focused on people aged 7 to 65 because the process is slightly different in how we support people. So who does LAC or local area coordination support? So all people who have a disability in Hume Moreland family and carers, whether they're eligible or not. So it is important to note, and Peter did mention it before, that we support people who have met access to the scheme and people who don't necessarily meet access to the scheme. So an example of someone who doesn't meet access to the scheme who might come up to us could be yourself, Peter. He's come to me, Gemma, I've got a hearing problem, but I haven't met access because it's not significant enough. So something I might support Peter with is linking him with his Australian Hearing Service, or I might have a conversation with him and say, if you go to your GP, you might be able to get a chronic disease management plan to get some information from, for example, an occupational therapist. They may provide suggestions to Peter around sitting in certain parts of the room where his good ear is and how he can adjust himself to hear better. So that's just a really small example of how we support people who don't meet access to the scheme. And there are 3 ways in which people do come to the Brotherhood of St Lawrence to get support. So the first way is a direct referral. So that's a referral from the National Disability Insurance Agency to the Brotherhood of St Lawrence to do some planning. The second way is, again, from the National Disability Insurance Agency, who've come across someone who doesn't quite meet access to the scheme, who need that assistance to link in with community and mainstream services. And the third way is through either self-referral or referral from a community member. So it might be a teacher, it might be a GP who's calling on behalf of someone, and then we can then make contact with them, go through the consent to have that conversation. And sometimes people just come into our office and we're able to support them in that manner.
So this is, you're looking at Moreland City Council's National Disability Insurance Scheme information session. We are streaming live through Moreland City Council's website and also Facebook Live, and taking questions from you as we're going. We're currently listening to Gemma Vaughan from the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, and also with us in partnership for the delivery of the NDIS, Peter Person from the NDIA, the agency which will be implementing the scheme. So if you have any questions for our experts, we're also going to hear from a range of people involved in the space throughout the course of the conversation tonight. But if you have any questions, please send them through on the Facebook live stream. So back to you, Gemma, from the Brotherhood.
Thank you. So how will local area coordination help you? So again, this is for people aged 7 to 65. So if you do need access to the scheme and you have a funded plan, we will assist you to do some pre-planning. So we will be running some pre-planning workshops. If someone doesn't want to attend a pre-planning workshop, we can send out a pre-planning pack, which will have some information about the reasonable and necessary components of the scheme, what a plan may look like, the participant statement. So that's something that we're working on at the moment. And then once someone is ready to have their plan, we can assist them to develop their plan, and that might be looking at setting goals. You know, for myself, I find it hard to set 12-month goals for myself, and usually they're always around fitness and never work out. But, you know, we understand that it is a big ask for people to come up with 12-month goals and life goals. It's, you know, might not be something that's on everyone's agenda every day of their living day that they live. So we support with that. As a plan, we can assist them to get their plan going. Some people, you know, they're on it, they've got the MyGov, they know exactly who they want as their service providers, but there's other people that need a bit of assistance, so we might support them to set up a Gmail, for example, get access to MyGov, log onto the portal, download or print a copy of their plan, so we can assist people in that manner as well, and we can support people to choose service providers. So we get asked the question a lot, how do you support people to choose service providers, because we can't recommend a particular service over another. So we do this in a number of ways. There's a website at the moment called Clickability that was developed by, from my understanding, was developed by carers and persons with a disability themselves, and it's essentially the Zomato of disability services. And then we might do a search through the Australian Psychological Society, and you can narrow down the results of exactly, you know, someone that you're looking for. So, you know, for someone that deals with adolescents, ASD and behaviours in the city of Moreland, there might only be 3 people that come up, for example. So we try to skill people to use the internet and their kind of informal networks. You know, ask the other parents at the school, or, you know, who at work do you know that has access to the scheme? Why don't you have a conversation with them? So that's how we support people in that manner. We also keep track of your plan throughout the 12 months. So we would do a check-in just to see how you're going, if you're connected with your supports. We check to see if you've drawn down on your funds, and we're your contact for 12 months if you've got any question in relation to your plan. And then we also support with the review process. So the next couple of slides are going to be specific to the early childhood, early intervention approach, and that's for children aged 0 to 6. So the early childhood, early intervention approach is, you know, I personally feel one of the really great things about the scheme. It's a family-centred approach, and it acknowledges that family and carers are central and crucial to supporting the development of the child. So children who are accessing the early childhood, early intervention gateway do not necessarily need a diagnosis to get access to this particular component of the scheme. And there's a number of reasons why that decision was made. So the NDIS is an evidence-based scheme, and evidence shows that the earlier you intervene, especially with children, the more positive the outcomes are going to be in the future. Secondly, there are a number of children who are on wait lists for, you know, a paediatrician to get a diagnosis, and, you know, you don't want children to be missing out on supports because they're waiting for those particular wait lists. Thirdly, you know, parents and families might not be ready for a diagnosis, or the child might not necessarily get a diagnosis because they may have, you know, developmental delays in only 1 or 2 areas that might not exactly result in a diagnosis, but they would still benefit from some intervention. And like the slide before where there was the person in the 5 spheres, the early childhood, early intervention coordinator works in the same kind of model as the local area coordinator, but they are very heavily focused on the family. Families are experts in their children and where they are with their development, so they're involved throughout the whole process. So the next slide is just about what the early childhood, early intervention pathway is. So the first step is connecting with an early childhood, early intervention partner, and in the instance for the City of Moreland, that's the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. So once they've made a connection with the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence, they might get some information. So information might be, look, we think that we've got enough information about your child. Why don't we work out whether you're going to access the scheme and get funded supports, or whether we could offer some short-term intervention. Or it might be about, look, it may be better off going with your maternal child health nurse, see how you go for a couple of months and come back to us. So the third step is working out what the support needs are. So the early childhood, early intervention team is led by allied health professionals and early childhood educators who have experience in delivering early childhood, early intervention. So they have the capacity to deliver some short-term therapy and some short-term family support. So the reason why they might do that is the child may not meet the criteria or may not benefit from accessing the full scheme, and some short 3 to 6 month intervention may be enough. Through gathering some information, they might not have the information necessary to figure out exactly whether they go through the full referral process to get an NDIS funded plan. So they will spend time with the family to work out exactly what the child support needs are. So from there, they might get that short-term intervention and some referral services and supports, or they may get access to an NDIS funded plan. And it is important to note, once the child does turn 7, they will have to be reassessed to get access to the full scheme. So this is specific to early childhood, early intervention with not needing a diagnosis. And throughout the 12 months, they'll monitor the progress. So that might be something that the early childhood, early intervention coordinator does independently if they've provided that short-term support and the linkages support. Otherwise, they'd be in consultation with therapists that are involved with the children. And this is just a snapshot of what the early childhood, early intervention core space that they work in. So you've got the support to get access to the NDIS, so that's to get a funded support plan, the short-term supports if that's something that's relevant to the child, and then linking into community support, so paediatrician, maternal child health nurse, etc. So these are where our main offices are, and this information is available on the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence NDIS website as well. The closest office to Moreland is the Preston office, so 293 High Street, Preston, and that's also where the current early childhood, early intervention team does sit, but there will be an office in Moreland. It's just not established yet. Currently, the Hume Moreland establishment team, where myself and my colleagues are based, is in High Street, Epping, with the National Disability Insurance Agency. And our contact numbers are there as well. So it's 1300 275 634. That's the best contact number to contact, and you will get through a list of numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you'll be put through to the Hume Moreland team. So it will either be myself or one of my colleagues answering your calls if you had any specific questions in relation to your individual circumstances. And then with the early intervention, the number's 1300 275 323. And there's some emails there. But this information is available on the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence NDIS website.
Great.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much, Gemma Vaughan from the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence, and before that, Peter Person from the NDIA, the agency that is both agencies working closely together to deliver the NDIS. You're watching Moreland City Council's NDIS information session being streamed live via the Moreland City Council website and Facebook page. We are taking questions via the Facebook page. If you'd like to put any questions to either Gemma or Peter, whom we've both heard from. We also have with us Sam Sharp, who works as the Manager for Age and Disability Services at Moreland City Council, who will be also able to answer some questions throughout the course of the broadcast. If you've just joined us, don't fear, we are recording it and it will be available live on the Moreland City Council website and Facebook page as a source of information later or for referral. Well, let's move now to someone who has a lived experience working both with the NDIS and as an NDIA staff member. So it's with great pleasure that we introduce to this session Meg Ormond to share her experiences of the NDIS.
I might stand up here. Okay, well, thank you so much for having me here tonight. I will share some of my experiences as an NDIS participant, and I do also work for the NDIA, and that role started recently for me. I won't share everything about my pathway experience with you, just some little snippets. So I was born deaf, and I actually am profoundly deaf and cannot hear anything. I grew up in a time where there were no services such as the NDIA or the NDIS, and I had a lot of issues with access to interpreters throughout my life until I explored education and the workplace. I never received a disability pension or any mobility allowance or anything like that. I just managed myself as I grew up. I had the support of my family, of course, but I did have a concession card that did state that I was deaf, and that allowed me to have a few discounts on things such as footy tickets and things like that, which was great. So, growing up where I did, I guess it was difficult for me to have full access to different things. I didn't have access to a swimming teacher that could sign, so I had difficulties communicating directly with people. The swim teacher they found for me actually passed me through the course, but I think that was just because it was a sympathy pass, and I don't think I actually really learnt anything because I couldn't communicate with her. I managed to keep my head above the water, you could say. And a few years ago now, I decided to participate in a triathlon, and I knew that I would actually have to learn how to swim properly. And I was fortunate enough to find a swim teacher who could sign a little bit, and they were previously a teacher of the deaf. So that was great for me. I finally learnt how to swim and breathe properly while swimming, so I could complete that triathlon. When the rollout began of the NDIS, many deaf people around Australia were so excited because they've never had access to services from the government really previously. So this was a really exciting time for us, and I had recently moved to the NEMA area myself, the Northeastern Metropolitan Area, and I was fortunate enough to be able to apply for funding through the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Really, I have to say that my experience was very quick. I was very fortunate. The rollout did start, it was a bit of a slow process, but I was really impressed with the staff at the Brotherhood of St Lawrence who contacted me after I had applied through the access process. They offered me to actually meet with a deaf planner. They currently had 2 at that time, and I've never had the opportunity to communicate directly with somebody like that in any service situation. So that was fantastic for me. So people who actually have a lived experience of a disability were able to provide that service directly to me, which is fantastic. So the communication process was so smooth and easy for me. Before I went into the room, I guess the service provider had notified me that the NDIS was a provider as well. So I used to work at an NDIS service provider, so I knew a little bit about the experience, but to go in, I realised what a smooth process it was working with a deaf planner. And I didn't take a support person with me. I brought my 2-year-old son, and I was also impressed to let you know that there were toys in the room that were clean and new and modern, and I thought that was great as a mother to notice that they supplied those for my child to be entertained. So the planner and I worked out what my goals would be, and we took note of those, and I'm happy to share a couple of those with you tonight. One of my goals was to feel safe within my own home for myself and my children. As a single mother, I had only had one smoke alarm within the house. Oh, actually, let me just mention, I can't hear a standard smoke alarm that most people can have access to within their home. So I needed to access a flashing alarm that would alert me or even vibrate to let me know if I was wearing the device or had it under my pillow if there was a fire. So we do have a government subsidy program where you can access that device at a subsidised rate, but it actually is worth about $600. And I only had access to one of those devices, which was in my bedroom, which was a little bit useless. If I was in the toilet, perhaps, and the smoke alarm was to go off or someone was at my door, I wouldn't be notified. So to live safely in my own home, I would need several devices, perhaps 6 or 8, throughout the home so that I could be alerted as to what was happening in the building. So I guess if you work out the cost of, say, $600 per device, that would be an extortionate amount for somebody to pay for the safety in their own home through an alarm. There's also a baby cry alarm system that's available, and I have a really old one. It was quite expensive that I bought when I was pregnant and had my 2 children, but it's such an old system that I figured because I have the 2 kids now, I needed several devices again to alert me when the children were awake at night or crying. So the NDIS actually funded those items after I had an assessment to fund my assistive technology devices that were required for me to be safe with my children in the home. So this is access that I've never had before, and I feel quite secure in the home now, knowing that my children and I are safe. Another goal I had was to participate in the community in a meaningful way. Of course, I have lots of deaf friends and other hearing friends who can sign, and I've got family and things, but to access the community, like community groups, play dates for my children, even to be involved with the parents in the schoolyard and other people in the school community, that was something I wanted to do. So if my daughter was divided to a play date, I would tend to just drop her off and pick her up at the end of it. It wasn't worth me staying because it would be a real hassle to try to communicate with people. And I think it's important that you get to know who your children's friends are and whether they're good enough for your own child or not. So to participate in the community, another important point for me was to access a community support group. I have a child who we call the Heart Kid because 2 years ago he had severe heart failure and he was in the hospital for 4 months, and I had no access to the support group that was within that community of children who needed transplants. I wasn't able to participate because it wasn't funded through the Royal Children's Hospital at that time. I feel that if I had the support that I have now through the NDIS, I would have felt more emotionally in control and have had a better experience and been able to manage my emotions. No one that I know has experienced anything like that, so it was really hard for me to explain my experience and to share that with others who knew what it was like. But now I have some NDIS funding, which means I can participate in some of those events. And I guess it's better late than never. So after my planning process finished, it took about 2 weeks for me to have my plan approved. And I was so surprised at how quick that took. It doesn't work like that for everybody, but I was really fortunate. When I saw my plan, I was so confused. I couldn't work out what all of the funding was for, and I actually called for a meeting with my linkages coordinator, and they sat down with me and the planner and explained how to access the portal, and it was so simple, and they explained what everything meant within my plan, and that was such a worthwhile process. So I've started my plan. It started recently, and I've decided to self-manage my funding through the NDIS. It's so strange to have choice and control. It's so new to me, and it means that I can use any interpreter I want, and I can actually have a choice in the service provider that I use to book my interpreters. And so I had to take it upon myself to inquire with all the interpreting agencies and find out the fees and processes for booking interpreters. And some of them actually wouldn't accept SMS bookings. And of course, I can't make the phone calls because I'm deaf. So I thought, no, that one won't suit me, that one will. And I had full choice and control over those options. It really was a new experience for me in compared to what I've had in the past. So I chose a booking service, an agency that was where I would get value for money and it was ethical. So for me, it meant I would have value for money and I could have support to access the events in the community that I wanted to. And it's so great to have that opportunity. So the NDIS is a really new system, and I know that all the service providers are learning, as we are, and the staff as well. So some interpreting agencies or service providers have asked me for my NDIS number or a copy of my plan, and I've had to argue that that's not necessary, that I am managing my plan myself and that they don't need to have access to that. And I do know that within some organisations that's been escalated to managers. But it showed me that I'm empowered now and I actually have choice and control as opposed to what I've had in the past. And empowerment is the word I would use. I feel extremely lucky to have that now. So really, in summary, I feel that my journey with the NDIS has been really interesting. It's still new. It's only been a few months and I am still learning, as everybody is. But I'm quite excited about what I can achieve in the future now, and everybody else as well having equal access. I think it's really important and we're fortunate in Australia to have that option.
Great. Thank you very much, Meg, for sharing your experience and the translation as well. Much appreciated. So you're watching Moreland City Council's NDIS information session, and we've got another personal experience to be shared in a moment from Nancy Sadka, who's the parent of 2 children, both recipients of the NDIS, to tell us a little more of her lived experience as well. But we have had some questions come through, and I think it's a good opportunity just to regroup and reintroduce who's with us tonight. So Peter Person is with us from the National Disability Insurance Agency and the partnership organisation, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, from which we have Gemma Vaughan, who's from the Brotherhoods, and Moreland's NDIS Local Area Coordinator as well. And also with us from Moreland City Council, Samantha Sharp, who's the Manager of Aged and Disability Services at Moreland City Council. I'm going to actually ask you to respond initially to Meg's lived experience working. Obviously we've had a really good news experience with Meg, but what that actually tells you in terms of what the potential is and what that means for people to be able to make their own individual choices. And I might actually come to you first, Sam, because you're often first point of contact with people, both yourself and Gemma at council. What does it mean, I guess, for people's own lived experience to sort of be transitioning to a new system and I guess embracing that opportunity as we've heard with Meg's story?
I think one of the things that I should say up front is that we as an organisation hold about 450 people under 65 at present who may be eligible for the NDIS. Of that, we know that there are definitely 222 who can test their eligibility, and our role at the moment is to keep working with those people and to support them to transition to whatever service provider they may want. So we've done a couple of things within council. We've put on an NDIS transition officer, and some of our current HAC program for younger people clients may have either had a conversation with Dawn on the phone, and I might get Dawn to come up a bit later, or may, just so that people might be able to know what she looks like, or I may have seen Dawn at some of the presentations. People might also have had a conversation with Katrine or Carolyn as well, our Metro Access officers, and obviously I'm not talking loud enough for Tess, but and so we've been doing things like putting on lots of with the NDIA, putting on lots of sessions to make sure that we can get information out to people, so that there is good information about what the lived experience is of transitioning. I suppose the other thing is that the Department of Human Services have extended the time frame now for us to support people in transitioning to the NDIS, and so that means that we kind of thought that we would help people transition between now and September next year, but that's actually extended until May 2019. So we're going to be partnering and supporting and working alongside people to transition. And if people aren't eligible for the NDIS, I think it's really important that those people who test their eligibility and aren't eligible need to understand that there also is still support for people through council, and so they can still come, and again through the HACK program for younger people they can actually also see if they're eligible for support that way as well. So we're not just walking away at present.
Can you just unravel the HACK?
So home and community care.
Right.
So prior to the NDIS arriving, there was that home and community care program. With the arrival of the NDIS, the program split into the HACK program for younger people and the Commonwealth Home Support Program. And when clients start to transition to the NDIS, their funding from the HACK program for younger people will actually transition with them.
Great explanation. Thanks very much. Sam Sharp, who's the Manager of Aged and Disability Services at Moreland City Council. I'm going to put a couple of quick questions to Gemma and Peter as well that have come through on the Facebook live stream. A couple of follow-up questions actually from some earlier queries. So we've certainly got a couple of very engaged people. Leanne's come back to us and wants to know whether or not there is assistance for planning from the Brotherhood once someone is confirmed that they can actually access the NDIS. So that planning, I think you actually talked quite a bit about that in one of the slides, about assisting that planning process. Perhaps if you could elaborate a bit more on that, Gemma.
Okay, so Leanne, what we can do in offering support to people, the first one is if someone, we can assist them to get access. Once they have access to the scheme, my understanding it's from mid-December through to January, February, we'll be offering some pre-planning information sessions or workshops. So through those workshops, we will cover in great detail what reasonable and necessary is, so supports that would be funded by the scheme versus supports that would be funded via the mainstream and community sectors, and then would really support people around developing their participant statement. So in the slide before, Peter showed the about me and then my daily life. So we'd give an example of, what information are you wanting to be present on there, because that's your plan, it belongs to you, so you can write what you're comfortable having on there, and about developing goals, so the 12-month goals and then the medium to long-term goals, which will both be present on the plan. And then we can have conversations with you about what your individual circumstances are, because everyone's plan is different, everyone's circumstances are different, whether they're moving out of home or they're moving from year 6 to year 7, or depending on exactly where they are in their life. And then through the planning conversation, the main aim is that you're prepared, but if you're not prepared, it's still our job through local area coordination to support you through the planning conversation. It might mean that we take more time with you, may mean that you need a second planning meeting, for example, so we can support people in that way with the plan.
Great. Okay, a couple of other quick ones before we hear from Nancy, just to cover off some follow-up questions that we've had. Peter, perhaps to you. It's a sort of almost shopfront question. Where does Jim apply for the NDIS?
So Jim should contact the 1-800 number, 1-800 800 110, and ask for an access request form to be sent out.
Okay, great. All right, Jim, I hope that's helped you. Those details were up on the screen and we'll revisit them as well. And there was one other one as well. Marie was asking whether or not her family could get access to the NDIS for a child with auditory processing disorder. And I guess that would come down to some sort of an assessment?
Probably wouldn't be an automatic
Yes or no?
So I guess we'd certainly encourage them to test their eligibility. Be categoric about
Indeed,
these things.
yeah. So hopefully that's at least gone some way, Leanne, to Marie rather, to answer that question. So you are with Moreland City Council's NDIS information session. We are broadcasting from the council chambers, which is rather nice for us, for those of us that are not on council, to be sitting. So might now introduce our final speaker to share her lived experience with the NDIS. So it's our great pleasure now to welcome Nancy Sedka, the parent of 2 children, both of whom, Nancy, are current recipients of the NDIS, to share your experience. Thanks so much for joining us. And
thank you for giving me the opportunity. So as you said, my name is Nancy and I've got 2 children. Andrew, who is now 25 years old. He has autism with intellectual disability. And I also have James, who is now 11 and a half. And he also has autism with intellectual disability. I'm a single parent, and prior to the NDIS, I don't know how I did it, to put it mildly. So, I'm a single parent, as I said, and I've been for the last 10 years, and I always felt like I needed to keep bopping up for air. Things will come, a big wave, something will happen, and I'm like, bopping up for air, hanging on to anything I can hang on to. And what people ask me, how do you do it? And the only thing I could say is, the only thing that kept me going is my love for my children and God's love for me. His faith, my faith in him, pulled us out together. And he said, I'll take care of you. And then the NDIS showed up.
it's a gift from God.
He said so. Well, not really. It is God who put it down through. So prior to the NDIS, what kind of services did I have? Like other families who are struggling, I had a little bit of support from the council. I had a little bit of support from an ISP package that came to Andrew in form, because he was an adult, he was going to a day service community. That's what he wanted to do. So that was his future for young adults. And then other than that, I don't have any immediate family in Australia. I am on my own, and I just had to make it happen. If I wanted to come to a meeting like this one, for example, I had to call organization and I say, do you have some funding so I can hire someone to come and sit with my children so I can come and be informed? Can I have a life? I'm a carer all the time, 24 hours. But what happened to me? Nancy. What is Nancy doing? Nothing. I get up in the morning and I start immediately with the children. At night, the kids would not sleep well. James would be up, he would sleep at 10, he would get up at 1, I would be up with him, Andrew would wake up, all together, and then it was not a sustainable life. And I was fortunate enough to live in the Nima area, so in the northern eastern region. And when they said, oh, the NDIS is coming your way, well, I said, well, I need to know, what is the NDIS? So I started going on the website, the original website of the NDIS, because I find the internet can be very confusing. And there are lots of sites out there that are not really providing adequate information for carers and for parents and for people with disabilities. So I needed to go somewhere where I could trust that the information I'm getting is the information that I can use. I spent probably about a year going through a pre-planning process on my own, as I needed to know who my children were, how will I make it work for them, what do they want to accomplish with their lives. The older one, although he is totally nonverbal, can have a strong voice when he's got that support, the little one, he doesn't have a choice. I'm his mom. I'm going to say what he's going to do, what he's not going to do. And so how do I make it work? And if Andrew has support, but James doesn't, it means when Andrew is out, I am caring for James. And if James is out, I am caring for Andrew. So when do I have my time? I wanted to do something with my life. I started before the NDIS volunteering here and there. I had a casual job at the Trobe University, and I liked it, and I want to keep it. But how can I show up on a regular time if there is no support for the children? And then, hurrah, the NDIS came to our region, and they said, everybody's going to get a letter. I waited, I waited, I waited, and sure enough, I didn't get a letter. All my friends got a letter. I didn't get a letter. So I rang, and they said, are you sure you've got children? Yes. And are you sure they have a disability? Yes. Are you sure it's a permanent disability? Yes. And I felt like I'm talking to Centrelink, every time, going and coming, going and coming. But finally they found them, and I didn't have to prove who they were, because they were already accessing some services from the council. They were accessing services from their ISP package for Andrew. And then I asked them, and I said, can I have one planner for the whole family rather than to have two people? And they said, yes, we can arrange for that. And I had, as I said, it took me a year to get my pre-planning. I knew what I had, and that's very important. I had to write it all down because the NDIS promised that you're not going to be worse off. So anything you're getting, you're not going to lose it if that is the support that you needed, as long as it's reasonable and necessary. And then I wanted to see where I'm going to go and how I'm going to get there. So when my planner called me, and oddly enough, she is from the Brotherhood, I said, can you come to the house? She said, of course I can come to the house. She met my children, and she said, all right, let's talk. And it was a very long conversation because she needed to know why, and I needed to answer, and I needed to have the evidence, because the NDIS would not cover anything that is not justifiable. And we put down the goals, and in February this year, we started. So transitioning from the old model to the new model was a challenge, because suddenly you've got this funding and you need to make it work. But in order to make it work, you're going to have to ask around and see who is doing what, which provider is doing what. Suddenly, previous to that, you were on a wait list forever and ever and ever, amen. Under the NDIS, I was getting in the mailbox, we're providing services under the NDIS. Well, where were you when I needed you? Let's see. So you have to, as a carer, as a parent, as a person with disability, to look through that and then make a choice. Because now I've got that buying power. The money is coming to me and I need to spend it. But I want to spend it by purchasing adequate support. So, for example, one of the things that James, who's the younger one, we were having trouble with self-injurious behavior because he couldn't communicate. He also was not getting enough energy to be spent, and he wasn't accessing the community. With funding, we started very early on. So, for example, the school had taught him how to go to the plaza, but he was going only to one place. My job now is to get him to go to Melbourne, not only to the store next door. So with a carer, he started accessing public transport, learned about safety, learned about how to go down to the city. We don't go just to Flinders. Sometimes we get off at Melbourne Central. And if anyone out there has a child with autism will understand that when you change something, but that's what he needed, because if at age of 11, he can learn how to regulate his emotions, that is money well spent, because when he is 21, he's got access to the community. And that was my goal for him. And before I knew it, he was going to Melbourne Central, he was going to Flagstaff, he was going to the Docklands, he was going everywhere. He was going through peak traffic, because peak traffic meant that he had to learn how to regulate his emotions in order to be included in the community. An outcome, for the first time, James was able to go to a holiday program supported with a one-on-one in a typical group, whereby he was able to take turns, he was able to communicate with the other children, the carer facilitated, and he came home with a smile. And that meant that when he came home, he was tired enough to go to bed and sleep all night. So we're sleeping all night.
And that's a great story and a great place to thank you very much, Nancy, for recounting your experiences with both your children, and I guess reminding us that it's about the broader family and the broader picture, and a really important perspective to bring to this conversation. You are watching Moreland City Council's NDIS information session, and we are broadcasting live from the council chambers, and also recording this for future reference. We have some great people with us who are still able to take some of your questions if you'd like to file them through on the Facebook Live. We also have a live audience tonight as well, and I will welcome your questions with us in a moment. The number that we referred to of the NDIA, that the National Disability Insurance Agency, that Peter was rolling off the top of his head, is currently on your screen. So we will be able to refer to that for you as well. So at this point, a good opportunity, I think, just to, I've got one more question that's come through on the Facebook Live, and then an opportunity, I guess, to sort of have some shared perspectives from some of those stories. So from you, Emily Kim, how is the NDIS going in areas where it's already been rolled out, like Preston, for example? Perhaps that's a question for you, Peter Person from the NDIA.
How's it going? I guess our advice is that, you know, based on the experience of Meg and Nancy, it's going well. I guess, you know, as we indicated before, it's a big scheme. There's a lot of people coming in. There's a lot of complexity out there. I guess we're trying to get across all of that. I would say bear with us if we don't get it right. We're trying to make those systems changes to make it more streamlined, more user-friendly. But I guess our feedback is that, you know, it's going well, it's working for people, it's changing people's lives. So.
As we've heard. Fabulous. Now, I know we've got some questions from the floor, so if we can, I know Genevieve has got some questions, so if we could actually move one of those microphones to Genevieve there and direct your question as you would, Genevieve.
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for tonight, and it's been very informative, and thank you to the two ladies giving their experiences. It's great. I have a gorgeous 19-year-old daughter, Yolanda, who currently is in a day service. I received my letter in August, and I'm really keen to start to get going. I just want to know what to expect. How long do I wait for a phone call and then the planning session? And when can I expect to start going?
Good question. Who wants to pick that one up? Emma?
So, you know, it's never too early to start with the pre-planning, and there are some getting plan ready documents available on the NDIS website. So when you go to the website and you choose participants, underneath that tab there can be some getting plan ready documents, and there is a really great YouTube video about reasonable and necessary. So that's something that I often show to people in planning meetings, because I feel it explains reasonable and necessary in a way that in a way that's more, I guess, accessible to people than to myself. So it would be useful to look at that. With the NDIS in the City of Moreland, the funding doesn't technically roll out to the 1st of March. So I guess from the 1st of March onwards is when you could expect to receive a funded plan.
But when do I expect to get a phone call or a planner to come to my house?
So that could happen any time from, I guess, December through to March, but it is important to note that a funded plan won't be available until after the 1st of March, so that could happen anywhere in the next 2 months. So there are 8,000 people that are transitioning to the NDIS, so I guess it's about the kind of throughput that's coming through to the National Disability Insurance Agency. You know, how many access request forms may be requested from week to week is information that I don't specifically have. So in that sense, I don't know. But yeah, Peter?
I would also suggest, Nancy's experience in terms of using the time to, prepare for when the planning process does begin. There is a range of information about the development of a plan. So I know that people are impatient. I can feel it. I understand it absolutely. I mean, I'd be rearing at the bit, but I guess the fact is that it is a large number of people coming in, and everybody wants to be first, and I can understand that. I guess we're just trying to do it in an orderly fashion. In terms of services that you're currently receiving, that they will continue until the plan is live. So it's not as though there's a gap between now and when your plan goes live.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions for our panel, our expert panel? If you could just introduce your name firstly and then direct your question, that would be great. Thank you.
Oh, hi, my name's Helen. And in question 2, because I've got the letter, and in that letter it said you needed reports from various people, and because I didn't have that, I've gone back to my doctor, and that's where it makes it really tricky when we don't have any idea when that call or when we need that information by. So it's not that I'm eager to start, it's more I need to get my head around making time for that, because I don't have public transport, I don't have a support worker. I've got to do it off my own back and empower my doctor and my counsellor to prepare them for time, because their time's precious as well. So that's my question to you.
It may well be, Helen, that it'd be good maybe to give the BSL a ring about what your doctor can do in terms of supporting you in your application, if that's what you're doing. So I guess there's that sort of personal contact that you could access in terms of what is the next step, and what is it that your doctor's role in potentially accessing the scheme, supporting you to access and test your eligibility with the scheme.
Thanks.
So we've heard obviously a couple of very strong stories of where the scheme is working, and some indications where we're looking at people are looking to transition onto that, and perhaps looking for ways that might be an improved service. So perhaps from your own experience, Genevieve, you look like you've actually got your plan all ready to go, and you actually know what you would like, but there's a frustration there. I sort of gleaned. Perhaps to follow up on some of the kind of sticking points, and perhaps if that's a council issue, or if it's a kind of a delivery agency issue, perhaps that might be a good follow-up question for you as well.
I had done a lot of research, and I've been to a valid course, which is helping me to prepare my plan, and I've already got my goals sorted of what I want to do. I just have to put a pen to paper to do it right now. And I guess a lot of my questions are around, I've got my head around the whole NDIS, I know what the plan is, I know what the goals are. It's actually the practicalities that are my next lot of questions, such as if I decide to self-manage, how do I do that? Does the money come to me? Do the invoices come to me and I pay them directly? How does that all kind of work?
Yeah, good follow-up questions, actually. Yeah. The machinations of it, yeah.
I mean, I guess there are a range of ways that the plan can be managed, and self-managing is one such option. So people basically run the the paying of invoices on their own behalf. It could be a mix and match. For some people, it's not an option. They don't want to do that, and the National Disability Agency can in fact manage the plan for them. So I guess it's trying to take account of the range of abilities or interests that people have. It's really trying to support people to to exercise the level of choice and control that they want to at that particular time, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's locked in stone. So you can change your mind about the way that you might want to self-manage the plan.
And
So,
I think
Jim,
it would be
yeah.
important, because Meg at the moment is self-managing her plan, so she can explain to you exactly what the process is. So it's not necessarily a bucket of funding dropping into your bank account, but she can show you the process that she follows with her invoices.
Are you able, perhaps, Meg, to follow up on that question? And we have assisting us, we have Jacinta and Sasha, who are able to assist us with the follow-up.
Yeah, it's a very simple process, really. I get an invoice, and then I go online to the NDIS portal, put in the date, then the item, say interpreting service for me, and then put how much it is and upload it. And then that'll be paid in the next few days. I do need to keep all of the invoices. That might be a challenge for me. I'm not an organised person at home in my home life. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how we go.
So the NDIA pays the provider directly?
No, I self-manage. So
yeah,
that's not included.
So what will happen is, for example, you put in, it's called a payment request. So when you log onto the NDIS portal, there's a little square and it says My Payment Requests, and then you press on it. Most people will pay for the service up front themselves with their own funding if they've got it available. So it might be a therapy session for $175.57, and then they've paid it, they log on My Payment Request, and then the funding gets placed into their bank account like a reimbursement.
Right, so you have to pay up front yourself?
You don't necessarily, that's just the kind of easiest way. Another way that some providers, and again, it depends on the provider, some providers have please pay this invoice within 7 to 14 days is generally the rule for providers. So you get the invoice on day one, you log on to the NDIS My Portal, My Payment Request, and then you put in the amount. It might be $1,000 for personal care, for example. And then within, I think it's 24 to 48 hours, the funding gets placed into your bank account, and then you do the B, whether it's the BPay or you physically pay on an EFTPOS card, you pay the provider in that way.
Right.
So from my experience of people who are self-managing, 90+% of them would be doing the reimbursement, because it's a bit more, it's a bit easier because you don't have those time constraints of the 7 to 14 days.
But you still have to have the money up front.
Yeah, so it really depends on your situation, and again, through local area coordination and the same with the NDIA, we can support people with payment requests. So, I have supported someone who's got a vision impairment and hasn't quite got their assistive technology in place. So he might come in, once every couple of months, and we can do payment requests together on the portal as well. And that's because the provider that he wanted wasn't registered. So we can look at supporting people in that way as well.
Sam, did you have a follow-up? Yeah.
Can I say something?
Nancy has a follow-up? Yes.
Another way of managing is also to have a financial intermediary. And this is what I have. So in that case, I don't have to worry about creating an account and all that, but I do see the bills. So the bills come to me, I approve them, I tell my financial intermediary, and they pay it. So that way I can keep my eye on my funding, and I know that I'm being billed to the service that I have received for that, if that helps as well.
Thank you.
I'm going to come back to Sam actually, because a lot of the interactions that people have had previously have come via council. Yes. And so this is a kind of a big shift in terms of how people have managed their lives and the role of council as well through this. And so for you as the Aged and Disability Services manager at Moreland, what are the key challenges or things that you're identifying as part of this transition for people, and how is council, for example, to assist people in that transition?
I think one of the biggest changes is that in the past, if people received home and community care through council, they would have received an invoice for their service. and that's because we're currently block funded to provide that service on their behalf. And they would have been charged a fee for us to provide that service. So there was like a co-payment fee that people have had to provide. The NDIS is a completely different scheme, and because it's a social insurance scheme. And so people now have the choice and control to go to any service provider that they choose. So currently they can sit with council. They may decide that, like Nancy had her sons wanting to go, or her son wanting to go to a holiday program. That's not a service that we currently offer. And so she's got the choice and control of the funding through her plan to support her to meet that goal. And so it's trying to, for us, a lot of it is about education at the moment and supporting people to understand the differences between the program that currently exists and the new program that is about to arrive in Moreland, and how we can support them. So we do have resources, as in staff. We've got information on our website. So if you just go to www.moreland.vic.gov.au/NDIS, there's information there. You can also call us on our 9240 1111 number and ask for one of our NDIS staff. That's probably the simplest way to put it. And we can help people if they are starting to ask questions or need to know how to get on to the Brotherhood, or need to know how to get on to Access and start to think about planning. That's the role that we're really looking to play at present, is to support people in that space. Make the transition as easy and as smooth as possible.
Just briefly, some closing. Did you want to sort of have a closing comment, Peter, just to sort of recap?
Yeah, no, I'd certainly endorse those comments from Sam. I guess there are a range of sources of information. So people sometimes feel most comfortable going through, finding it online, but if they want to do that personally, there's the Brotherhood or Council or the NDIA that they can contact with. There's a load of written information out there. Not that our audience can access that, but there's a range of ways that people can get information about NDIS. So I'd certainly encourage them to take up those opportunities.
And that's probably a good point to close our conversation for tonight. Clearly, lots of questions still to be answered in that transition, and I think we've heard from Nancy and Meg their own navigations through that process as well, which they've certainly indicated required their own sort of tenacity and persistence to actually make that work for them. So certainly lots of questions. One more question have we got at the back? Okay. Okay. If you could, just one question at the back, and if you could identify yourself with your name and perhaps direct the question if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, so my name is Ardua, and I just was wondering, with the NDIS, when you actually get rolled out, I understand that you've spoken about 3 types of ways, but I'm actually a bit confused as to which way to go. Like, I don't think I'll be self-managing as much as I would like to. I just think it'd be a bit difficult for myself. So I was just not sure who could answer that.
So, Ardwa, if you're not interested in self-managing, the National Disability Agency...
I am, but I'm just not sure how to go about that.
Oh, sure. So I guess that would be a conversation that you would have with your planner. You don't have to get too freaked out about it right here and now. So that would be something that you could discuss with your planner through that planning conversation, and then come to an informed decision about what is it that's going to best suit you. As I indicated, you might make a decision one way or the other, but that's not locked in stone. You can change your mind at some point in the future and self-manage, or get the agency to manage it, or whatever the case may be. So there's a load of information about it, but you can rest assured that that will come up in your planning conversation.
Thank you.
And I'll just add that when people do get an NDIS plan, it's a 12-month plan, and they've got a lifelong relationship with the scheme. So it may be in the first 12 months you might want to look at self-managing one particular line item to see if it's going to be the right choice for you. So we can talk to you about that in your planning conversation. And, it might be your a goal, a 12-month goal is to self-manage my plan. So we could look at getting supports in place and how to best support you to navigate the portal and feel confident and have the, if required, the necessary assistive technology to support you to achieve that goal. So again, just a note, the 12-month plan, might not be what you want to do in the first 12 months, but you'll definitely have that opportunity as you get additional plans to explore that option.
I think we've got another question at the back there as well. So again, your name and
hello, I'm Katrina. Just in terms of people who are eligible for the NDIS, I noticed that we haven't really talked about people with mental health issues, and I'm just wondering how that fits in terms of if it's an intermittent issue as opposed to something that people live with every day.
Clearly, the people with mental health issues can access the scheme. We understand absolutely that mental health can be an episodic thing. So I guess just in general terms, the responsibility for supporting people in terms of their clinical or their treatment needs, that will remain with the state government mental health services. But the NDIS will absolutely pick up, I guess, the support needs of a person in the sense that their mental illness affecting their activities of daily living. Can they access the community? So I guess a fairly clear example is someone might have depression and it means that literally they can't get out of bed. So clearly that means that their mental health issue is affecting their daily life, and so the NDIA would step in, the NDIS rather would step in that instance. So I guess the diagnosis would be required around the person's mental health condition, but we understand that mental health can fluctuate, and so some people might use their plan if they're accepted into the scheme for part of the time when that's required. At other times they're better, and so they wouldn't necessarily access that support.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Katrina. Yes, a question.
Hi, I'm Carolyn.
Hi, Carolyn.
I'm hearing a lot about support coordination, and I'm slightly confused as to what the role of a support coordinator is, and more importantly, how you would choose one or choose the best one. There seems to be so many providers out there diving into this space at the moment. Can you help with that?
So maybe I can talk about the first part. I mean, support coordination is really, it's a funded support, so the NDIS will fund that support. It doesn't come off your plan, it's part of your plan. It's really about to assist the person with disability, their family, to implement the plan where it may be more complex, if you like. So it's really to assist in that implementation phase. I mean, I guess the thing about choosing a support coordinator, I guess there's a range of sources that you might want to think about in terms of trying to get a steer on a support coordinator, a support coordination service that is recommended by other people. I guess Gemma was mentioning clickability, and there's other kind of forums that you can access. I guess suffice to say that the word gets around about services, and so I guess it won't become a secret of if a service is good or not so good or not recommended by other people. And I guess the thing about choice and control is that you can test a service, and if it's not a service that you like, then you can change that service.
Thanks, Peter. Any other questions from the floor? I guess what we've been able to establish is that there are still a lot of questions and a lot of I guess elements of confusion and still to sort of work out how this is actually going to impact on my life or my family's life and how we actually transition to that. So it's a good starting point.
There's a lot of detail. It's a complex scheme.
Yes, indeed. But a good place to start. And
Indeed.
We're grateful to all that have come along tonight and indeed to Peter Person Hutchison from the National Disability Insurance Agency, which is the agency implementing the scheme in partnership with the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. And our thanks to Gemma Vaughan for coming along tonight and really detailing, laying out the detail around the framework for the scheme. We've also been joined, of course, by Samantha Sharp from Moreland City Council, who's the Manager of Aged and Disability Services here at Moreland, and some terrific personal stories, and we thank you very much for sharing those. Nancy Sadkar, and also from Meg Orman. Can I also thank Sasha and Jacinta, who have been our Auslan translators. Can I also just add that the future sessions, the dates for future sessions can be found on the Moreland and Hume Council websites or at the ndis.gov.au. That number again, if you'd like to talk to someone on the phone, 1800 800 110, or you can go to the website ndis.gov.au. Thank you so much for your company tonight and for being part of the broadcast. If you have any follow-up questions, you can do that by engaging through our Facebook page, and you can look later for the recorded version on Moreland City Council's website. Thanks so much for your company, and from me, Tracy Hutchison, good night.